Thank you very much for the warm introduction. Hi, everybody. I'm Chris Sayegh. I wanted to start out by showing you a video that we actually did in Vancouver. Whenever we go to a new place, we don't only want to cook there, but we want to use what's available in the land around it. So if I can get the initial trailer to start, I'll let that play first. I think it would be easier to explain the hurdles that I haven't had to jump by combining cannabis and the culinary world. But it's been a nightmare at times. It's been so volatile in so many different directions between family and friends and the culinary world and just the professional world in general. People are still calling me the weed chef. It just doesn't matter to some people because all they see is a stigma.
Food is something that is universal. It brings people together, and we know that. It brings food, family. When you can present that experience and introduce cannabis into it, I think it flips a switch in people where they start to think, well, this isn't a weird thing, right? This is like an ingredient in our lives as opposed to something that's altering our lives.
I think, when you look at the common denominators that food and cannabis can bring people together through, when you look at this synergy of science and senses, food is medicine. And when we get reminded of that, it's a powerful tool that people can use again to enhance their own understanding of how to take control of their lives.
I didn't realize that I was going to use cannabis in the future, to be honest. I just used it to help me eat. I used it to help me go to sleep. I used it to help me maintain a schedule. And that was really powerful for me. And then I didn't realize that I was going to use it in such a capacity as I got older until one day I'm sitting there and I'm like, wait a minute, why am I still buying brownies? Why am I still buying Rice Krispies? Where's the real food at? So I started to experiment, and then the Herbal Chef was born.
Oh, yeah!
That was a really special video. It was a really special, it was just very special. It was such a privilege to come out here and then actually feed off of the land and then bring something to Vancouver that excited the city. And I couldn't have done it without a lot of people, but Tiffany's actually over there as well, which she put that together in a lot of ways. And Aura Cannabis, you might recognize some of the guys on the video, like Kirk Tusaw, who was on panels earlier, and Andrew, who was part of Aura and on the same panel. But it's a small industry. So I guess what I would like to do today in this workshop is to just kind of go over the basics of infusion, the different properties in which you would find usefulness in using THC versus CBD versus terpenes, and then how they all can be combined to create an experience versus just using it in a one-dimensional way. So this is kind of an open flow. It's I have some things prepared here, but please, if there's something that is pertinent, ask it, because I'll be going through an entire presentation as well. So there's a lot of information to go around. So how I started the Herbal Chef was very simply. Honestly, it was out of a garage, and then out of a car, and then slowly out of one. From my dining table was also my rollaway ice chest that I would use for dinners, and it kind of just built up through very slowly. But what it started out as was I was a student at the University of California, Santa Cruz, and I was studying molecular cell biology. And all that means is that I was taking microscopic pictures and studying them, essentially, and how they flowed through the body, how they worked within the body. And that got me to think about how cannabis is going to work in the body, because at that point, I was like, all right, if I'm going to smoke weed every day, I need to know what I'm doing to my body and how it's going to affect me in the long run. And at that point in my life, I was not using much of anything responsibly. So I took it upon myself to at least learn what cannabis was and why I had been told for so many years that it was something to be feared. And as I studied this, I realized just how much we were being lied to. And not only in the US, but around the world, where it was essentially being used as medicine as early as 2000 BC, yet in Western culture, it was illegal starting in the early 1900s. And the reason that it was illegal was because it was a rival cash crop to tobacco, to fuel, to textiles, and that didn't sit well with me because every paper that I had read in 2010, and mind you, I was in one of the largest scientific libraries in the United States at UC Santa Cruz, and it was there was 10 papers on cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system. So there was no information, relatively no information compared to even now and compared to what there will be. So I couldn't wrap my head around how even the 10 papers that I read were all showing positive attributes of cannabis to these patients that it was applied to. Yet we're sitting here and talking about how cannabis is awful and how we can't allow this plant to be legal and how it's going to change everything and make people lazy, et cetera, et cetera. And it just didn't sit well with me. So I became an advocate at that point, but I didn't know that I was going to be able to use it down the road, and I didn't know that cannabis would be such a big part of my life. I just knew that I loved the plant, I knew that I loved to use it, and I knew that no matter what I was going to do, I wanted to help people. And that's when it all started to click, was that my mission was to bring plant medicine in a way that was familiar to people. And what is more familiar than food? Absolutely nothing. And no matter who you are in the world, what race you are, what religion you believe in, what sex you identify with, what anything that differentiates us on the outside, we all eat. And so in that moment, I realized that my mission was to bring and destigmatize cannabis to every part of the world through food. And that was when, as you heard in the video, that was when the Herbal Chef was born. And that was, again, started in very, what's the word? It was started off very humble. And now what we try and do is we do cannabis-infused fine dining. So as you saw some of the food items on the screen, we do typical is a 10-course tasting menu. And for those of you that haven't had a tasting menu, it's usually a smaller portion, and it's given out over 10 courses. So while each dish may not look like enough to fill you up, it comes in over stages. It's the same way that we take our philosophy on cannabis and the introduction of cannabinoids and CBD as well, is a typical edible. How many of you have had an edible? Okay. How many of you have had a bad experience on an edible? Okay. Pretty much everybody that raised their hand for one raises their hand for another. And our philosophy is that it's taken in, well, first off, the dosage is completely wrong in most cases. And doing this at home does not yield for an accurate measure of dosing. So those are things that I'm going to get into a little bit later in the presentation. But the reason that I bring that up is because over stages can really mitigate the overwhelming nature of eating an edible all at once. And when you have a tasting menu and it comes in over 2.5 hours, all of a sudden it changes the structure in which, one, how much you eat, because you're digesting as you eat, so you'll eat a little bit less. I prefer to eat this way, although I don't all the time. And then the cannabis, as it comes in over stages, it doesn't overwhelm you at any one stage. And for us, that is the epitome of this experience, is that we are food-centric with an accent of cannabis. And in order to do that properly, we need to know what we're talking about. So first and foremost, we have to start with a lab-tested extract. And that then can only come from a regulated system. So before we could even, back when it was me cooking for anybody who would hire us, it was a lot of not knowing what was in the extract, or, oh yeah, that's 75%, that's 50%. It's, I put like a pound in there, I don't know. And that was a level of sophistication we were dealing with, which led to us not really knowing what was in any edible at any point in time. And so it made it really difficult to make a business off of that. So we started to work with local extractors and local labs to make sure that the extracts that we were getting were not only from an organic source, that we knew that they weren't putting pesticides and such into the plant and growing it, but that they were extracting it in a way which kept a full profile. And that's really important for us because as many people here on the stage, by the way, you guys have been getting excellent information all day. All these speakers, I'm very used to being one of the few that will talk a little bit more scientifically about cannabis, and all these previous speakers up here have done an amazing job. So there's a lot that I'm not even gonna be able to, they've already said. So I'm really stoked for that, because that's an attest to how much the industry has grown, especially here in Vancouver. But we couldn't know anything about the plant, so we worked with them to then get a full profile, because THC without CBD is not going to be as powerful as a full spectrum. If you're just taking an isolate, it's very difficult to get a well-rounded effect and have the endocannabinoid system nourished properly if you're only receiving one micronutrient out of the family of nutrients. So we put in the full profile, and then we started to get everything lab tested. So we'd know exactly 75% of the THC, which then we can then infuse into our product, and we could do everything by weight and volume, which is how it should be done. And now we're seeing a lot of companies coming to us asking help for their large-scale manufacturing, where they can't homogenize anything because they haven't taken on the notion of weight and volume yet, which is relatively simple. But without that piece, without the knowing of what percentage of THC is in your extract, I would not ever eat the edible. And I also have a funny story about that. In April, I was here for Grassroots. And it was so funny because I was up on stage. How many of you know who Watermelon is? She's a very big activist here. She's a wonderful lady, has done so much for the activism in this community. But I feel that when we were on stage together, a lot of the sentiment was that it should be, live and let live. And as we mature in this market, there is no room for that anymore. You have to know what you're putting into your body, just as you know what you're getting in your packaged goods. If you go and buy something from the store, you want to know what's in there. You want to know if there's dairy. You want to know if there's gluten. You want to know if there's whatever it is. So that's part of the, what we want to bring to the table, is just knowing what is in your product. And that should be a standard across the food industry, always, indefinitely. With that said, I'll explain a little bit about what I have going on here. Has anybody heard of a sous vide? Nice, okay. So essentially, it's a water bath, for those of you that don't know, or it's a machine that keeps the water at a very consistent temperature. And then through these bags, then you can fill it up with whatever you'd want. So typically you can put in a protein, right? And then let's say that you put it in a fillet of beef, and then you put in some butter, some garlic, and some thyme, and then you vacuum seal it. It sucks all the oxygen out, and then allows the beef to infuse with the butter and whatever aromatics that you put in there. So right here in front of you, this is going to be a little tricky with one hand, so pardon any slip-ups. So as you can see in here, I have an oil that's being made with some of the same ingredients that you see on the front of the table here. But essentially there's bay leaf, there's garlic, there's peppercorns, there is rosemary, lemon peel, and cannabis. And the reason this is so the cannabis has already been decarboxylated. I'm sure most of you know what decarboxylation is, but for those of you that don't, it's a fancy term for heating your cannabis up. And the reason that you do this is because if you were just to eat the flower of the cannabis plant as is, you would not receive any psychoactive benefits from it. However, when you heat it up, which is why you light the joint or you vaporize or you use some sort of heating element when you're smoking raw flower or a cured flower, then turns the THCA or tetrahydrocannabinolic acid into THC, which is the psychoactive. And those THCA has incredible benefits and has, it is a micronutrient in its own right, but THC is generally what we're after, and if we're trying to cause a psychoactive effect. So and this also plays a role in understanding terpenes. Terpenes are the flavor and aromatic proponents of the cannabis plant. So in the trichome of the plant, there is cannabinoids, and currently we know about 62 of them. There could be more. There's probably going to be many more that come up over time. And there's also terpenes. And these terpenes, obviously, as you can see here, don't always come in the form of cannabis. They are present in cannabis. However, they come in rosemary or pine needles. Myrcene can come in mushrooms and have that earthy notes. Lavender has myrcene as well, which is calming. So when you go into the sauna, you have lavender in there. And that soothing feeling is not coming from the lavender, rather from the myrcene that's in the air. Sage and cinnamon and pine nuts and lemon peel, all of these contain their own terpenes. And what we're finding out is that the terpenes actually play a role in the mood imparted upon the consumer. So what that means is that you've heard indica and sativa. I hope this doesn't come as a surprise, but those are very vague and non-descriptive ways of attributing a feeling to the cannabis plant. And while we're still going to use them, and I will still use indica and sativa, to give you a little bit of background, indica typically will take on myrcene more often than not. So that indica will be associated with a myrcene, which will calm the body, which will go into the CB2 receptor, as you heard in the previous. So there's two receptors. There's CB1, which is in the brain, and there's CB2, which is found in the nervous system in the body. And typically, your sativas or your limonene and pinene will be correlated with the CB1 receptor or the mind high, right? And then your indicas, your CB, will be correlating to your CB2 receptors, and that's found in myrcene and sometimes beta-corifline. And those terpenes will basically direct you. They're like the paddle behind the boat, directing you in which direction you're going to go. So what we've done is, throughout the 10-course menu, if you have, oh, you know what? I forgot I had the presentation up. Can we skip ahead 2 slides? Okay, we'll leave it here for now. So we have a graph that we try and explain to people, and on the x-axis and on the y-axis, you have essentially you have 1 to 10, and that's how high you're going to get, right? 10 being overwhelmed, 4 to 5 being the sweet spot. On the other axis, you have the longevity of time, how many courses. So throughout the first 10 courses, in the first 8 courses, you're going to be receiving the majority of your THC. Actually, in the first 8 courses, you receive all of your THC. In the last 2 courses, you're going to receive CBD. And what this does is create a balance where it takes you, our goal is to keep you in a state of euphoria during the dinner so that you're engaged, that you're talking, that you're paying attention to the food that's in front of you. Because wouldn't it be a shame if we spent all that time scuba diving and foraging and gathering ingredients from the land, and then you're so high that you can't even participate in the experience. So and not only that, but it keeps you happy, and you don't have to, wake up with a wicked hangover in the morning. But the whole process is that in the first 8 courses, THC, CBD, and it creates this balance from euphoria to blissful relaxation towards the end. And that's where we will then introduce our massage lounge with fresh juices, and we have you can get a massage from Apothecana, you can get aromatherapy, and we let you in live music and that's kind of the Zen area where you can digest and gather yourself before you get your ride home via your ride share. But what happened was we started to see a lot of people copy this. And so we're like, okay, well, we need to take pen to paper and figure out how we're going to specifically use these terpenes to create something that nobody else can replicate. And so what we do, and as I'm telling you this, please replicate it. But as this particular mixture of herbs, spices, and cannabis will promote the efficiency for pinene and limonene to come through, and that will be the dominant terpene that you're ingesting for the first 4 to 5 courses that's in the dinner. And so again, those terpenes are favorable in the sativa category, meaning that they uplift you. They're more of a mind stimulant. And so that's what we want. We want you to be alert and aware, and this is helping you bring up the entire evening, right? It's setting everything up. And a side note, it's really funny to watch the whole room. I swear to God, in Vancouver, I asked the room, how many of you use cannabis? Like 3 people raised their hand out of 65 people in the room. And I'm like, you're here for a cannabis dinner. Nobody's going to rat on you. Just tell me, like, I'm just asking. And so everybody raises their hand, and you sense this tension almost of like being open with cannabis use, and then by the end of the evening, as everybody has received their doses and there's a very specific wine pairing, everybody is talking to one another, and there's this incredible energy that has flowed through the room, and it's a tangible effect from the beginning to the end, and it's really a beautiful thing. And how we try and facilitate that is with the underlying terpenes in the actual oil that we use. So again, this is the starter, so this is going to be high in limonene and pinene. And then we will make another one where it'll be high in myrcene. So we'll put mushrooms in there. We will put cinnamon in there. We will put clove in there. And that will help the myrcene and help the body calm down. So instead of taking you up, 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 we're going to cap you off here in the middle and have you smooth sailing until you get to your CBD and your desserts, and then you go home and then you're just in this state of blissfulness, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. So if you can give me a second, I'm going to put this down so that I can assemble this other bag, and I'll kind of show you how I do that. So you just saw me put rosemary in there, some bay leaf, some black peppercorn, some garlic, lemon peel, and grapeseed oil in there. If you are trying to make this at home and you just want to do it for yourself and you're not reselling these, I will give you a ratio in which you can use very broadly and vaguely. I will not, I wouldn't ever put my name behind this as something to be resold. This is for your personal use at home. But if you put an eighth to a cup of an eighth of ground flour, and you're going to use 17% as the THC content of it to be safe. Most cannabis is in the range of 12 to 19%. So we're going to, and some is going to be up there in like 23%, but that's very rare. So we're going to use 17% as what the cannabis is, and that way the algorithm that you can get in our book and online will feed into, so you can just plug in the numbers and you'll find out roughly how many milligrams of THC are in there. However, so when you have the ground bud, you're going to then, I'm going to just grab it real quick so I can give you guys a visual. So when you have the ground bud, you're going to put an eighth into a cup of the oil. But before you do that, you have to take the ground bud. You're going to get your oven to 200 degrees, preferably 170 if you can get it there. Most ovens will go down to 170, I think, is the lowest. But ideally, the lower the temperature for the longer amount of time, the more efficient and less variables there will be in the decarboxylation process. However, for the home, which I'm assuming most of you are going to cook out of, is if you can do it at 200 degrees for about 20 to 30 minutes, depending on how much you're rotating it, but you should rotate it very often. And that will dry out the bud and turn it green to like a little brownish color. And what that means is signifying the change in compound, and it's turning from the THCA into the THC. So when you put the decarboxylated bud into this, then you only need to put it on, and again, the reason that I'm using the Ulabo or the Fusion Chef sous vide is because I believe in keeping everything as consistent as possible. Being in the kitchen is a lot like being in a lab. You have to be consistent, you have to be clean, and you have to make sure you write everything down. So for instance, for this guy, the decarboxylation process will cut down the time that you need to have it in here. So ultimately, you can leave it in here for 24 hours and it'll decarboxylate fully. But do you want to spend that 24 hours decarboxylating it in the bag and having it go really slow? Or you can put it in here already decarboxylated, put it in here for 2 hours, and you have your oil ready to go. And that's kind of the difference between using it, more efficiently, or if you have an ability to decarboxylate it versus if you don't have the ability to decarboxylate. I mean, and just out of curiosity, is everybody from Vancouver? Is anybody not from Vancouver? Is anybody from the States? Okay. So we have a couple people from the States, but my presentations are geared towards the States, where I know a little bit more about the compliance packaging and such. I will discard this slide for now, if we can go on from there. So packaging is changing rapidly, and on October 17th, we're not even going to have edible packaging for another year after that. So it's just a whole mess that will prove, it'll work itself out over time. But essentially, what we do for dosage is we have an algorithm again, and I'll post that up following this. But it's a very simple mathematical equation that allows you to take what you already know, which is the percentage of THC in decimal form of the plant or the extract, and then however much you need of the, like let's say you need 100 milligrams and you have, or I'm sorry, you need 1 gram and you have 100 milligrams of a substance, that is 1-to-1 ratio right there. If you have 100 milligrams of THC and you need a gram of this to equal 10 milligrams total, you simply take 1/10 of the 100 grams. Again, this algorithm will be up on our website. But the reason that it's so important is that people have taken a wildly different way to ingest cannabis. Ingestion is not the same as inhalation, and it's not the same as sublingual or topical. And you just heard a talk about the topicals and how targeted they are, and they're incredible. However, the most bioavailable way to receive nutrients from this plant is without a doubt sublingual and through ingestion. So the bioavailability of smoking, I'll go at the lowest rung, smoking a blunt, right? You have tobacco paper in there, there's whatever cannabis you have rolled up, and you're smoking it with a butane lighter. You're getting maybe 5% of what that plant has to offer. That high is coming from all sorts of things not even related to the cannabis. Then you go, let's say you do a joint, you're in the same field, about 5 to 10% of the bioavailability of that plant is getting transferred into your body. And then it has to get broken down, and so you're really getting a minuscule amount for what you're smoking. Then if you use a water pipe that has water filtration, then you're still getting about 15 to maximum 30% in the water pipe. And then if you vaporize it, that's where you can get upwards of 60% of the available concentrate, or upwards of 60% of the available nutrients in the cannabis plant. But most of the time, and you'll see a lot of people use the term ABV, which is already vaped bud, or AVB, yeah. And they can still get about 40%. You can still use that to create edibles because there's still potency left in the plant material. And then if you go through sublingual and drinks, alcohol, that can get up to 90%, and then anywhere sublingual, you can get up to 90%, 95% if they do a really good job, 98 in between alcohol and sublingual and ingestion. But the reason that ingestion is so important is that it lasts in the body as well. So not only are you getting more of the nutritional profile of cannabis, but it lasts much longer as well. Some people don't like that, some people like it. It's ultimately up to you. But if we're talking about strictly bioavailability, the choice is 100% clear in edibles. I'm gonna skip ahead a few here. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going. So we've had to do a lot of data research, and mostly that comes in the form of reflection, because we host a lot of these parties, we host a lot of different types of events. The most common type of event that we'll throw is if we have a dinner party. And those events we have mapped out from A to Z really well. The tricky part is getting people to say, to stick with the program. So if somebody wants a cocktail beforehand, if somebody wants more wine, if somebody wants another cocktail during dinner, if somebody wants to go and smoke outside, all those variables are difficult to deal with as we're creating a structure for on-site consumption, which is what we hope to bring to Vancouver, to Toronto, all of Canada. And the reason for that is because alcohol plays a really big role in it's a catalyst for the metabolism or metabolization of THC. So as you are ingesting it is really, it helps everything move along. So instead of a typical edible taking 45 minutes to an hour to kick in, we're now talking about it kicking in about 15 minutes. And the reason that that works for us is because we have a schedule to keep with our 10-course tasting menu. So instead of it hitting you at the end of the meal, we now have it hitting you in the third course, where you are now to start to feel that uplifting, and it happens during the dinner. And for us, that's a advantage, that we use alcohol as a tool. Not only does it pair well with the terpenes in the food and the tannins in the wine, but it also pairs with the food as well. And wine and food have been it's essentially balancing flavors, which as a chef you try and repeat in every single dish that you come out with. So the entire ethos behind that is really just creating a balance, and balance is I think in life is just a very important thing to have. So again, as I was talking about the bioavailability, what we're trying to do is get people to realize that this is like a lock and key mechanism in your body. The endocannabinoid system is such a beautifully built system in the body that was discovered in 1992, which is crazy to me considering the body has been mapped out since the early 1900s, yet they missed this entire system that regulates the energy in the human body and will help achieve homeostasis. So I don't know if you guys buy that shit, but I don't. The endocannabinoid system is very special. So it facilitates energy to all of your major organs. And as you can nourish your endocannabinoid system, that will then help regulate and nourish your body, which will then lead to homeostasis. And as we all know, that just means a more efficient, healthier life. So what we try and propose is wholesome food, targeted nutrition that is then infused with cannabis, mainly CBD. THC should be up to the individual. That is in your daily diet. Because if we all start to intake more cannabinoids, our ECS system is more nourished, then we all of a sudden become a healthier society, which then promotes healthier styles of living, and essentially is how the world changes. It's one small interaction and action at a time. So our part through that is the food here, and you guys make that possible. We can go one more. The other part to this is cannabis is not just, let's ignore the medical side for just a minute, which is a ginormous side of cannabis. But let's ignore that and just focus on the plant itself and hemp, and how useful this plant is beyond the medicinal components. It is absolutely crazy how this could be illegal and not in use, considering how much water it saves, in comparison to any other type of material being produced currently. Hemp will could take over biofuels, hempcrete and animal housing, food, fiber for clothing. I mean, there's 50,000 applications, and that's kind of what got me to fall in love with it in the first place. Was I realized, wait a minute, this isn't all about getting high. There's much more to this plant. And what you're told is the Cheech and Chongs and don't get me wrong, I love Cheech and Chong for their own reasons, but they just perpetuated a stigma that wasn't necessarily well thought out, and they didn't necessarily see the repercussions that were going to happen down the road. But now we have that opportunity to know that cannabis is a very well-rounded plant, and I think it is our duty as these first movers and as people coming in to this industry to use cannabis wisely, to understand that you individually, every single person in the audience right now, has the power to create something that will help their community and therefore help the land around them. And if everybody were to take on that responsibility, it would be a much better world that we lived in. And I believe that through responsible use of cannabis, through responsible use of psychedelics, and spiritual growth overall, and really getting in a sense of community, that is what's going to take cannabis and humanity to the next level of consciousness, in which, hopefully we have a much easier and better world. And with that, I sincerely appreciate your time, and I would love any questions that you may have. Is there anybody? Yeah, hold on one second. This lady was first. Is there any way I can give a mic out to the crowd? Is there another mic, or is this the only one? Mic. You can talk loud? Okay, if you want to tell me, I'll scream it out.
Help them to treat symptoms, and like post that publicly for like general knowledge.
So the question was, do you think it would benefit humans to create recipes that will benefit specific ailments? The answer is absolutely. I think there's no question about that. But a better answer is that we are currently doing that. We're creating a vault of recipes that is specific, and currently we have diabetes, we have a line for geriatrics, so overall health in old age, and what's it called? And for cancer patients, and those are targeted through nutrition. So if you're deficient in omega-3s and fatty acids, we put that into the meal, which then has CBD as well.
Having just heard Ethan Russo yesterday tell us that fibromyalgia and PTSD and IBS are all endocannabinoid deficiencies, I think that's a good recipe to start, man.
I could not agree more. In fact,
we've been left out of most medicine. There's never anything effective to help us, so it would really be appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I only do that out of understanding what it's like, and for my grandmother who has many issues of her own, and having to cook for her, and so that was something that was near and dear to my heart, and actually something that I pitched the very first was my frozen meals, and I got laughed at because of how that could never work. But now we're literally trying to talk to hospitals about getting this into programs.
Thank you.
But it's to your question, yes, absolutely. If you want to, oh yes, sir. Sir? He said, I have a 15-minute infusion that would get somebody really high. That is, I don't know exactly what you're talking about. There's an infusion in here that's been going for an hour, and this will take about another hour to get to where it needs to. Oh, yes. So how fast it gets you stoned is a product of the mixture of ethanol and, and THC. I'm sorry? So the question is, how do you get stoned quicker, essentially? Right. What I'm telling you is there's a mixture of ethanol, so alcohol, and being used in conjunction with THC as the edible, and the metabolism happens much quicker with the edible because you are ingesting alcohol as well. Yes.
Hi, thanks. I had great visions of that movie, Babette's Feast.
About what?
That movie, Babette's Feast.
Babette's Feast. I'll have to watch it. I haven't heard of it.
It's amazing. Not using cannabis, but just the love of food.
Yeah, which is...
Yeah. My question was about people with wildly different tolerances. Do you find yourself having to supplement those with high tolerances so that they can have the same outcome?
Yeah, so most of the time, though, tolerances are a very fickle and highly volatile thing. Everybody has a different tolerance. So it's impossible for me to say what is good for you is good for you is good for you. However, what we do have is a threshold, and we say our initial beginner, you've never had cannabis before, or you know that you're a lightweight, we're going to do 10 milligrams and 8 ounces of wine. And what that will facilitate is our very beginner experience. Within that, when we get hired, we can then switch up the dosage per individual based on what they know their body to be. And we ask them a questionnaire, and we say, okay, how often do you have edibles? How often do you smoke? And a lot of people will say, oh, well, I smoke every day, so I have a really high tolerance. Well, how often do you take edibles? And they say, never, I only smoke. And again, we say, okay, well, we're going to give you 10 milligrams, and they get offended by that because they think that their tolerance is really high. And it is for inhalation. However, through the digestive tract, it is a much different experience. And we don't want to overwhelm anybody, because if we do, then we're not creating a sustainable and viable business that will, go into other parts of the industry. So we treat it the same as there's personal responsibility involved by you coming and telling us, hey, I would like more or I would like less. And then there's also the questionnaire where we feel people out comparatively to multiple other people who are in the same boat, who are in the same weight class, who are in the same gender. And then we kind of use that to build our profile.
But on the spot, if somebody says, well, my edible tolerance is 100 milligrams, how can you help that person?
Unless it's a patient, which we do have a lot of patients that we do dinners for, and we've discussed this previously, we won't do it, just out of liability. It makes more sense for us to say, well, once you're done with the meal, we have smokables in the lounge for you, and then they can ingest as much as they'd like. Yeah. Thanks, Lena. Yeah, thank you so much. Is there any other questions?
You gave a eye-opening experience about you get 5% out of a joint, and you said sublingually up to 90% is bioavailable. What about the new fad with the vape pens?
So that's vaporization. You can get a good amount from the vaporizer, but again, when you dump that vaporizer out, if you steep it in any sort of fat, you will derive more potency, which means that you didn't get all the bioavailability out of the vaporized cannabis.
So could you give me a vague percentage? What percentage of the vape
And
pen?
please understand that these percentage vary.
Oh, yeah, for sure, yeah.
It's not an exact, but depending on so many things, timing and temperature are the two of the main components. But typically, you can get anywhere from 40 to 65% vaped or 70% vape out of a vape.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to point out that a lot of the vape pens use something that is used in movie theaters for the popcorn, so the butter feels like butter, and if you smoke it, you get popcorn lung.
Interesting.
Bad,
Oh, the glycerin. You're talking about glycerin.
What? It's something that is used. The ailment's called popcorn lung.
Yeah.
And when you see some moron in the car in front and he blows a big cloud of smoke out the window, that's not tobacco. That's popcorn oil.
Yeah, that is, okay, so there's two different things. There's like a vaporizer that is vaporizing the flower, and then there's concentrate vaporizers. Concentrate vaporizers can sometimes be made with a glycerin that will cause popcorn lung, and popcorn lung is no fun, and you should avoid that at all costs. Very, very unhealthy. But to your point, those are two different things there. And a lot of the...
I'm specifically speaking about CO2 extract oil, 100% pure. Out of that, maybe up to the 30% THC level, and then the THCV. But what percentage, if you're taking a breath, is because of the breathing mechanism as effective as digestion?
It's a surface area in the lung. So same thing like as you may have heard growing up, they say, hold it in, hold it in.
Yeah.
That doesn't get you any higher, it just cuts off oxygen. You can't have any more surface area in your lungs absorbing THC. So what you ought to do is suck it in, and then suck it in again, and then suck it in again to expand your cavity as much as possible, and that will increase the surface area. So the bioavailability is, again, it's going to be a little bit higher because it's a concentrate and not a flower. But I would say in the range of 60 to 75% there.
Okay, so I'll hand this over, but you're basically saying the atomizer is the new joint?
No, I love joints, and I don't think joints are ever going to go out of style or out of use. But I have to, as an educator, also say that joints are not the best way to consume cannabis. And you are bringing on, if you use a butane lighter, you're bringing that in. You're bringing in, whatever the carcinogens from the paper and how they are fused together. That will also then, play a role in what goes into your lungs. So just be aware of that. But the atomizer, I would say, is a step closer to the cleanest way to vaporize. Right. The plasma lighters, all of it's coming in. The technology's coming.
Okay, Chris, we have another question over
Yes,
here.
thank you.
How do you use the oil, the infusion here? Do you just garnish your dishes with it, or do you saute, or how do you actually put it into the food?
Heat is a very big proponent is a very big factor in cooking with cannabis, because the more heat that you have, the more that it degrades. So, for instance, when you are doing a fractal distillation, which is essentially heating it up gently in an ethanol base. So you take the cannabis ground up, you shake it with ethanol, and then you put it into a big fancy tube with a small Bunsen burner that is at a consistent temperature. And then you have a little glass off to the side. So as the ethanol turns into a gaseous state and the cannabis turns into a gaseous state, it'll lift up and go in and collect in the other glass. I know this is a lot, but what I'm trying to get at is everything has a different temperature. So if I'm sauteing a pan, that pan's at 400, 500 degrees. You're burning off your terpenes, you're burning off your cannabinoids and THC right away. Terpenes is at the lowest the lowest combustion point, and some of them start as low as like 115, and then it'll go to THC, which is the combustion rate is around 163, pardon me. And then CBD is at about 173. So anytime you are heating it past that, you are degrading your product. Not only is that bad because you want to keep all your cannabis, but from a restaurateur perspective, I am now losing product. Same thing as cutting off the end of my squash and throwing them away versus sauteing them and putting them in a puree, saving food costs. So anything that you're heating, when we make a sauce, we will make the sauce. I will taste it to make sure that it's seasoned correctly and what we want, take it off the heat, and then infuse it. Because could you imagine every time that we had to taste something, do you know how high we'd be in the kitchen? It'd be awful. We wouldn't get anything done. And personally, we don't allow any of our staff to be high while cooking for anybody else. But and how we avoid that is by tasting off the heat when the sauce is done, then infuse it by weight and volume.
Hey, great presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
I want to say, to your chef, do you have any good ways to infuse like salmon or like any fish like that? Because I'm big into seafood, and being a coastal city like Vancouver is, do you have any good recipes to infuse with seafood like crabs?
Yes. In fact, in the video as well, you see us smoking the salmon and curing the salmon with gran fir and salt and sugar as a cure for it. But we actually have a whole recipe video blog in which we have a seafood pasta, and we have many different types of seafood, and we're getting into more. We're doing like curing and stuff, but it would be on there as well if you'd like to check that out. I think it would be more helpful for you to view that than for me to give a recipe in grams to you right now. But thank you so much for that. Oh.
Flavor to go with the cannabis.
I see. Yes. So personally, I do not view cannabis as an enhancement to the flavor profile of a dish. However, it does go well with certain dishes. For instance, there's some that are with black peppercorns complement or you can actually chew on them to reduce the high, the psychoactivity, and you can use mango to propel the high a little bit more. So what I like, though, the combinations that I find to work well with the earthiness of cannabis is high acidity and high sugar. So cacao is a great example, and so is a tomato sauce. Both great examples of things that you can put it into that it will actually balance out in versus overpower.
Okay, I think we have about probably 5 more minutes left. I have a question over here. If anyone else has a question,
We do
come
have,
on down
we have
here.
4 minutes, so I can probably take 2 questions. And
Okay,
also,
if anyone
thank
else
you
has
so
a
much,
question,
Selena.
come down here and we can get you.
All right, I'll try to make this quick. First of all, thanks for taking the time to come and do
Oh,
this
it's my
with
pleasure.
us, and your knowledge is awesome, and thanks for sharing. I wanted to ask, you mentioned in brief about having recipes specific formulated for diabetics, for cancer, for that sort of stuff. So are you working with people to kind of to get that data going, and what are you looking to?
Currently we have a food scientist that we've been working with. We have a food nutritionist. We have a doctor, and then we have a master chef and myself that are working on the recipes all together. And we have a booklet of them already, but we're looking to expand it, obviously, and any help that we can get is, obviously welcome. But we're currently producing it in the United States, and we're looking at taking it over into Canada as well. Ultimately, our highest goal for the Herbal Chef is to become a center of education, of solid foundation for all of this information, as well as to reform how healthcare is looked at through food being used as a form of treatment.
Beautiful, yeah. I also wanted to ask, just brief, has there been any dialogue about like Red Seal certifications for working with food and cannabis in combination in some
I
sense?
fly to Toronto next week to give a keynote at Restaurants Canada, and then I'm also working with George Brown University in hopes of creating, we already have the curriculum done, so we're basically taking this around and trying to link it up with well-known colleges that will accept our proposal for creating a certified herbal chef. That way, anywhere in the world that you go, if they have this certification, one, they know how to homogenize, they know how to dose properly, they know how to mitigate any issues that may come or arise through overwhelming cannabis, and how to just treat a dinner party or a event that is with cannabis versus alcohol or any other type of event. So yes, and I'm very excited about it. Cool, any more questions? Well, I thank you so much for all of your time and for sitting here and hearing me speak. I really appreciate it. Thank you, and thank you, Selena.